It is fantastic to be in South Dakota, the home of the free and the brave, one of the last few states that's left standing after this coronavirus situation. I want to thank the leaders of this state who actually understand our constitutional form of government, recognizing that we are a republic and that our public employees work for us and not the other way around. I want to thank RCAF for pushing forward with an in-person convention. There have not been many of those this year. I'm very proud of you because I think that it is incredibly important that if we live in fear, we destroy so much of what is right and good in this country. And it's going to be folks like you that are going to lead us back to what we used to be, back to our constitutional foundation, and to lead and show that we can lead by refusing to give in to the fear that has been rampant in our country for the last 6 months. I want to thank you for your leadership and your dedication to fighting for and protecting the livestock industry. I grew up on a ranch near Fort Laramie, Wyoming. I'm a fourth-generation Wyomingite. We've now moved on to the sixth generation of folks, of ranchers in Wyoming. My great-grandfather came from Texas in 1879 and homesteaded near Douglas, Wyoming. I also want to thank Tracy Hunt for contacting me early last summer and reporting a very strange document that he had discovered posted on the USDA website. And I want to thank RCAF, the Hunts and the Foxes, for being willing to work with NCLA to file what I believe is an incredibly important lawsuit. After listening to Tracy this morning, I think that it is very obvious that many of our enemies are in this for the long haul, and they play the long game. And we need to start being better at doing that as well. Before I talk specifically about the lawsuit, I want to give just a bit of background about how we got here. One of the things that I always say is that government is oftentimes trying to fix its last solution. And I think that's exactly what we're dealing with here. Government is always trying to fix its last solution. Everything is incremental. And we've seen, I first met Tracy, I've known him pretty much all my life because we're both from Goshen County, Wyoming. But I saw one of the earlier iterations of his speech about 4.5 or 5 years ago in Dodge City, Kansas. And I can tell you, when you watch the evolution of this and see how things have changed in what is reality a very short period of time, you understand how we find ourselves in this position at this point in history. What is also obvious is that the effort to push RFID on our livestock producers has been around for at least a decade, if not more. And what happened was that in 2013, well, actually starting, I believe, in 2011, the USDA put out a notice of rulemaking, and it was to develop and adopt an animal identification and traceability rule. If you go back and you look at any of the initial documents associated with that, you can tell that the intent was to go with an RFID rule at that point in time. But there was substantial pushback from the industry, and that's very critical, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. But there was a substantial amount of pushback from the industry, including RCAF. RCAF submitted, I think it was a 38-page comment document on that rule as to why RFID should not be mandated. Ultimately, what USDA did is they realized that the livestock industry, the cattle producers, were not going to support an RFID-only rule. But they adopted a rule anyway, and it's one of those camel nose under the tent type situations, because what you can see is they adopted a rule that in large part doesn't really mean anything. The 2013 rule says that you can use the very types of identification you've used for the last 120 or 30 years. Brands, ear tags, tattoos, back tags. Well, why do we need a rule to say that you can use the same type of identification you've always used? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they needed a rule. They needed a mechanism by which they could start then incrementally wrapping up, which is what they're doing. That's what they've done. It's what they continue to do. But again, they also knew that the cattle industry was vehemently opposed to an RFID-only mandate. So what they did is they said, okay, well, we'll just adopt a rule, and we will allow you to use a variety of forms of identification. And they basically said that it was going to be up to the states and tribes to determine what forms of identification would be allowed. And it was related to the interstate movement of cattle. So not all livestock are subject to the 2013 regulation, and not all livestock, not all cattle would be subject to the new RFID rule, because it only applies to the interstate movement of cattle. Well, for a state like Wyoming, you can imagine how devastating that would be, because we don't have a packing plant. And so during the life cycle of most of our livestock, they are at some point going to have to move across state lines. So it's going to affect some states more than others. And then if you think about it and you think, okay, the alleged purpose of this was because they want to make sure that they can trace and track disease. This is a health issue. We want to make sure that if there is brucellosis or there is foot and mouth or something like that, we're able to quickly go in and trace that animal. And that was one of the reasons that they advocated for the 2013 rule, and then ultimately for the RFID fact sheet that they issued in 2019. But if you think about it, Nebraska is the third largest cattle producer in the nation, and a lot of the cattle producers in Nebraska don't have to move across state lines. Same with Texas, same with Kansas. So is this really about health, or again, is this about control? And I think that we all know the answer to that. So that there was one aspect of the 2013 rule that was actually very beneficial to our cattle producers. And that is that it was an actual rulemaking, and that is that it cannot be changed unless the administration, the USDA, actually goes back through and does another rulemaking. Well, rulemaking is hard. Rulemaking takes years to do. You have a lot of input from your industry, and depending on whatever the issue is, you can have thousands, tens of thousands, you could even have millions of comments come in. One of the largest rulemakings in history related to the roadless rule, which was a lawsuit that I handled many years ago on behalf of the state of Wyoming. There were 1.2 million comments submitted related to the roadless rule. And again, it takes money, it takes time, it takes outreach, it's all of those things. But it's really the only way that an agency can adopt a rule that has the legal force and effect of law. And I want you to remember that. An agency cannot adopt an enforceable regulation unless they go through the rulemaking process. Well, they did that in 2013. And one of the things that they did, the only area where they preempted state or tribal authority, was they said no state and no tribe can mandate RFID use. What that tells you is that your industry pushed back hard enough that they recognized they were not going to be able to do that and mandate it. So right now, the way that the 2013 rule reads is that it is illegal for a state or a tribe to mandate RFID use for the interstate movement of cattle. Well, we now know that the USDA and the ear tag manufacturing companies, and most likely the NCBA and the packing industry, never gave up on their dream. They never gave up on their idea that they were going to force every one of you to put an RFID ear tag on your cattle. And so throughout 2017, and at least up until August 2019, the USDA continued to work with two separate advisory committees. Kenny Fox was on one of them, and fortunately, he was a strong advocate against RFID. So in order to take care of that, they just pushed him out. They didn't want anybody who was opposed to RFID to be on those committees. Now, another tell when you work with agencies a lot, you can start understanding how they use terminology and what they do and how they explain things, and you can always tell what they're trying to do by how often they repeat something. So I cannot tell you over the last year and a half how many times I have read industry-led advisory group, industry-led cattle producers, industry-led group of people who were advocating for RFID. Well, it's not any of the cattle producers that I know that were advocating for RFID, but that was the excuse that USDA uses, and it's how they try to convince people that it's actually the cattle industry that wants this. What happened was that after those two groups, the two advisory committees, they developed a plan. And it ended up being this sheet of paper. This is a 2-page fact sheet that one day was posted on the USDA website. And this is the document that I know Bill was aware of, Kenny was probably aware of it, many of the others were aware of it, but this is the sheet that Tracy Hunt called me about. This is what we refer to as a guidance document. This isn't a rulemaking, this isn't a regulation, this has no force and effect of law whatsoever. Yet this is the backdoor way that the USDA in April 2019 mandated that by January 1st, 2023, every single cattle producer that moves their livestock across the state line will be required to have an RFID ear tag. It was through this very simple, almost a document that you would read it and you wouldn't even necessarily recognize that it had anything to do with some of the other things we've talked about, the 2013 rule. It says, beginning January 1, 2023, animals that move interstate and fall into specific categories will need official individual RFID ear tags. It identifies some of the types of cattle that don't need to have the ear tags. It talks about a transition support, tells you where to get them, tells you have to go get a premises identification number. You have to register your premise with the USDA, and then you have to start buying your official RFID ear tags. So Tracy called me, I started researching it, I looked into the 2013 regulation, and I said, there's absolutely no way, it's not even remotely possible, it's not even remotely legal that they could issue this fact sheet after issuing this rulemaking. So while I'm not a huge fan of rulemaking, in this one circumstance, this actually has provided you with some protections, because unless they go through another rulemaking, USDA cannot force RFID on our cattle producers. So again, this is a guidance document. This has no force and effect of law. And it violates the Administrative Procedure Act. It violates a variety of other statutes as well. But it clearly shows that it is intended as a substantive or legislative rule. And in fact, according to this document and according to some of the background information associated with it, if you fail to comply with it, they're going to start imposing penalties in addition to disallowing you from being able to transfer your livestock across the state line. So RCAF, the Hunts, and the Foxes hired the New Civil Liberties Alliance, the firm that I now work for, and on October 4th, 2019, we filed a lawsuit to stop this. We filed a lawsuit and claimed it violated the 2013 final rule. It violated the Administrative Procedure Act because it wasn't adopted appropriately. It violates the Federal Advisory Committee Act because it was put together by a bunch of people in the back room. You heard Tracy talk about the smoke-filled room. This was one of those. And it also violated the Congressional Review Act because all substantive rules must be submitted to Congress for review. And if they're not, they cannot go into effect. Sometime around the 25th of October, I received a phone call from the Wall Street Journal, a reporter with the Wall Street Journal, and she wanted to talk to me about this case and write up an article about it. And she said, now where's that fact sheet so I can go get that? And I told her where to get it off the website. And she went there and she called me back and she said, Harriet, there's no fact sheet there. There's nothing there. There's a 404 error. Every time I click on that fact sheet, it comes up a 404 error. I said, that's not possible. So I went on my computer, did the same thing. You get the 404 error. So I got a hold of Bill and said, something really funny is going on here. And Bill and his team drafted a beautiful press release, and we had it in the newspapers issued the next day. And then lo and behold, the USDA published a one-page sheet that had no branding, no letterhead. Every USDA document you've ever seen has got its letterhead, it has its logo, it has a date on it, it has a control number, it has all that information. This was a white sheet of paper. And the USDA said, well, we have withdrawn the 2019 fact sheet. So we knew that we'd won. We were pretty excited about that because it's pretty rare that within 3 weeks after filing a lawsuit, you can actually say, wow, we won one. That's how illegal this fact sheet was. They knew that they were going to lose. They knew that it was not possible to legally defend this. But this is a tactic that is often used by federal agencies. And I've been around long enough and sued them enough times that it is very common that when they do know that they're going to lose something, they will attempt to withdraw it, they will attempt to hide it, they will do a variety of things because they don't ever want a judge to rule in the citizens' favor against the government. That is the one thing that federal agencies and federal employees absolutely cannot stand, is that when there is a decision that is issued by a judge saying what you did was wrong. And it's one of the reasons that as an attorney, when you fight against these federal agencies, it can be so difficult to find case law that supports your position, because it doesn't exist. Because for me to go in and explain, they issued a fact sheet, they can't do this, and here's the 10 cases that say that, they know that those 10 cases don't exist because they find a way to moot the cases. Like, voluntary cessation is the terminology that we use. They play dirty tricks is what they do. And they make it so it's very difficult to sue the federal government or even defend against claims that may be brought by the agencies. They basically then can argue, see, judges, we don't ever do anything wrong. There are no decisions out there saying that agencies do things wrong, and that's what they did here. We fought hard against our motion to dismiss that they eventually filed, and what they argued to the judge was, hey, we withdrew the fact sheet. It's no longer right for review. We fought against that, and we filed briefs with the federal district court as to why this should not be dismissed. I knew that there was probably a limited chance that we would be able to prevail on that, but I wanted a decision from the judge saying that what they did not comport with the APA, that they could not go with a fact sheet, that they had to actually do another regulation. And we did get that. We ended up with a decision out of the federal district court in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is where we filed this lawsuit, because the Hunts are from there. They're from Newcastle, Wyoming, and we were able to file it in Cheyenne. And Nancy Friedenthal is our federal district court judge. She ruled against us. She allowed the case to be dismissed, but we got some very good language in her order, basically telling the agencies that if they ever try this again, they have to go back through the rulemaking process. And that's what I wanted. I really wanted that kind of terminology. But what was also important was that she never addressed our Federal Advisory Committee Act claim. And what the Federal Advisory Committee Act says is if you're going to have an advisory committee, it has to be balanced. You have to publicize your meetings. You have to disclose all of the documentation that comes out of it. It's a transparency statute. Well, the USDA, when they formed both the Cattle Traceability Working Group, which is what Kenny Fox was on, and then later the Producers Traceability Council, that they didn't follow the Federal Advisory Committee Act. They violated FATCA. So I convinced the judge that she should allow us to file an amended complaint on that specific topic, and she granted that motion. At the same time that we were filing our amended complaint, we filed a FOIA against the USDA and asked for a variety of documents to get the emails and the text messages and the documentation associated with these groups and the USDA's interaction with them. In July, the USDA had to file what they refer to as an administrative record. And anytime you have agency action and you sue them, they are required to produce all of the documents associated with that particular rulemaking or that particular agency action. So we received about 300 pages of documents in the administrative record in July. And also in July, we received the response to the FOIA request. And it may surprise you, but none of the documents were the same. Even though they were attesting to the fact that they were producing 100% of all of the documents associated with the development of that fact sheet. So we got 200 pages of documents through FOIA, all of which are entirely different than the 300 pages that we received pursuant to the administrative record. So we have now, just this past Monday, we filed a motion to compel the USDA to file an answer to our complaint to actually proceed in this case, and we've asked for discovery. Why that's important is that I want to get these USDA employees under oath, and I want to question them about what it was that they did with the Cattle Traceability Working Group. I want to find out about the PTC. I want to find out where this came from, and I want to find out exactly who was behind it. We do know that one of the primary people that is associated with pushing the RFID is, as you probably imagine, one of the head people with the ear tag manufacturing companies. So those are the kind of folks that are sitting in the back room, in the smoky back room, dictating what your life is going to be and what you have to comply with. The ear tag manufacturing companies, the NCBA, the packers, they're all sitting around deciding how you're going to run your operations. And Tracy talked about it extensively today, and I wish that there was anything that he said that he talked about that surprised me, but it doesn't. Because coming from the cattle industry and having brothers who continue to raise livestock, it is very clear to me what the intent of this is. I have been fighting many of these issues, whether it is fighting to protect water rights or fighting against the U.S. Forest Service in terms of the way that they manage our national forests, for many years on these very same unrelated topics, and that is the radical environmentalism that we're seeing that is now being visited upon you. And that is what the RFID ear tags are about. The RFID ear tags, right now, the way that your cattle industry operates is you're an undifferentiated commodity, which means when we run 5,000 head of cattle through the Torrington sale barn in a week, they basically run through. And if there isn't anything that comes up hot, if everything checks out and they go on to Nebraska or Kansas or Texas or wherever it may be, it's just simply one more animal that went through the sale barn. The moment they get RFID, they can call up Hugh Hageman and say, we really want you to fence out all your springs. We really want you to change that bottom rung wire so that they're more wildlife friendly. We really want you to donate to the World Wildlife Fund. We really want you to do X, Y, and Z. And if you don't, you're not selling your livestock. And that's what this comes down to. This is one of the more dangerous things that I've seen in a long time, because what it does is it exposes an entire industry to complete and total control by the USDA and by the people who are making the decisions, these transnational corporations, whether they are the packing plants from other countries or whatever they may be. Listening to the gentleman talk about what is going on with Brazil and listening to other folks tell me more and more about the foot and mouth disease, what you realize is that we're importing our own problems, and our USDA is complicit in that, as are other people. We're importing our problem. We're refusing to adopt COOL, country of origin labeling. We're doing things that are so negative to our cattle industry at the same time that they're trying to say, no, this really isn't going to be that bad. They want you guys RFID'd because they know that they're going to be bringing in things that none of us want and that are going to be very devastating to our industry. So this is the way. They're always trying to fix their last solution. Why would we be importing from countries that have foot and mouth disease? Why are we even considering that? I'm sure that you read 2 months ago what was coming in from China, and they were able to intercept a shipment of meat that had been contaminated. I'm sure that you've seen the packages of seed that people have been receiving from China, and people questioning what that is all about. I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't know why people would be receiving that, but I can tell you that's an enemy country. And the idea that we would be importing anything edible from China is just really rather mind-boggling, probably for most of you as well. I want to talk just a little bit about NCLA and my practice and why NCLA does what we do. As the introduction was explained, I have been a practicing attorney for over 31 years. I'm a trial attorney. Primarily for the last 20 years, my practice has focused on fighting with the EPA, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA, the Corps of Engineers, and a variety of state agencies. I work for livestock producers, cattle producers, water providers, gravel producers, oil and gas companies. I'm pretty much, what did they call me? The Wicked Witch of the West was how I was. I shouldn't have said that. My family hates it when I tell people that. That I was the Wicked Witch of the West is the way that one environmental group described me. The wise archangel of the West. Thank you. I'm going to start using that one. But I finally decided a couple of years ago that I really wanted to dedicate myself and my career to the public policy arena and fight for people who may not always be able to afford me when I was in private practice. And so I looked around and I looked at a variety of law firms throughout the United States. I really didn't have any intention of moving to Washington, D.C., but I found the New Civil Liberties Alliance. And I had previously met Philip Hamburger, and he is absolutely brilliant. He is probably the foremost expert in the United States on administrative law. And he wrote a book called Is Administrative Law Unconstitutional? And in fact, it is. Administrative law is when our regulators and our agencies are the ones that are making law. And our legislative branches throughout the country, both at the state level as well as the federal level, have really abdicated their responsibilities in terms of legislating. They've turned so much of it over to the executive branches because then no one can be held accountable. The reason that our country has always been so successful is because we are a republic, and our legislators, our presidents, our governors are answerable to us. And they are responsible for carrying out what we demand and what we want them to carry out. When you have nameless, faceless bureaucrats making all the decisions, there's absolutely no accountability whatsoever, and that's where we are right now. And it's really not turning out very well. A lot of what we're seeing is the fact that Congress has simply abdicated its responsibility to make law. And whether it's granting more authority than it should to the USDA or the Fish and Wildlife Service or whatever it may be, the thousands of agencies, nobody even knows how many federal agencies exist. So Philip Hamburger formed the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and I'm going to read you just a short brochure that we have over there because I think it really encapsulates and describes what NCLA is and what we do. Our founding fathers designed a constitutional system with separated powers in which each branch of government has a distinct role in preserving individual liberties. Congress legislates, the president executes those laws, and the judiciary provides its independent judgment about contested cases. Most Americans do not realize that Congress now enacts fewer than 100 statutes per year, and there are over 3,500 regulations that are adopted every year just at the federal level. The financial impact on our economy is over $2.1 trillion a year, which is approximately 50% of the income tax receipts. That's how big our administrative state has become, and that does not count what happens at the state level or even the local level. This administrative state now enforces and adjudicates hundreds of thousands of regulations governing daily activities in our lives. The New Civil Liberties Alliance is a nonprofit civil rights organization founded by prominent legal scholar Philip Hamburger to protect constitutional freedoms from violations by the administrative state. NCLA's public interest litigation and other pro bono advocacy strive to tame the unlawful power of state and federal agencies and to foster a new civil liberties movement that will help restore Americans' fundamental rights. As he states, let judges judge, let legislators legislate, and stop bureaucrats from doing either one. That is, so that's the NCLA. Again, we have additional information over there if you'd like to stop by. We also have printed up a one-page summary of the lawsuit that we've been working on behalf of you, as well as our individual ranchers. There are other lawsuits that we want to bring. We are constantly looking for cases where we can challenge federal and state overreach, where we can go after what these agencies are doing and the unlawful activities and the violation of our civil rights. Now, there's a couple of other things that I think are very, very important, and that is this. The USDA isn't done yet. Even though we file a lawsuit, and even though they've withdrawn the fact sheet, and even though they have committed that they cannot and recognize that they cannot enforce the RFID mandate without going through another rulemaking, last month, they yet again issued one of their guidance documents. And it is a document that is a notice of comments. It is not a rulemaking. And what USDA is attempting to do now is say, okay, you can use brands, you can use back tags, you can use tattoos and group identification numbers, but if you use ear tags, they have to be RFID. So they have put this out for comment, so anybody who uses ear tags will at some point have to go to RFID, despite the fact that the 2013 regulation prohibits states from mandating RFID ear tags. So the comment period closes on October 5th. It is incredibly important that you comment, that you write letters, that you call, that you oppose, that you scream, that you throw tantrums, that you do whatever is in your power to stop this. But what this tells me, I've not seen an agency pivot as quickly as USDA has done on this particular circumstance. And what this tells me is that RFID ear tags is incredibly important to their long-term agenda, and we have to stop it. So comment, participate. I know that RCAF will be doing so. I know that they will be submitting comments, but it is imperative that our individual producers also stand up and say no. But there's something else you need to do, and you need to be getting a hold of your congressional representatives, and you need to be absolutely going insane on them about their effort and their refusal to protect you. Their job is to protect you. And their job is to protect you from the USDA in this circumstance. Get a hold of your legislators, get a hold of your governors, get a hold of your senators, get a hold of whomever it is, and fight this rule. Because everything that Tracy talked about today comes back to this one thing. They will put you out of business if you do not comply with their mandates that are going to be coming down the road, because the World Wildlife Federation and a lot of those other folks that Tracy were talking about, these are evil people. And they want to either destroy the livestock industry or make sure that it is only the elite that are able to eat beef in the future. It is imperative that you guys continue to fight this. Again, thank you to Bill. Thank you to Tracy and Donna. Thank you to Kenny and Roxy. I so appreciate your support, and really, really thank you from NCLA for bringing us into this fight with you.